there's more in common between fascists and marketers than you think. The Third Reich and many of the darkest chapters of World War II were inspired by one of the greatest marketers of the 20th century, Edward Bernays. He wasn't just anyone. He was Sigmund Freud's nephew, and he realized something terrifying. People aren't driven by logic. They're ruled by emotions: fear, desire, identity. And if you learn to press the right emotional buttons, you can control the masses. He made bacon and eggs a traditional breakfast. He taught women to smoke by selling it as freedom. And his book, Propaganda, ended up on Goebbels' desk. It became a playbook for Nazi Germany. The method? Simple. Repeat a lie until it becomes truth. Create an enemy. Feed the crowd fear. Give them a symbol, and they'll become an army. The Reich fell. But the machinery of manipulation stayed. If you don't understand how marketing works, it will be used against you. Edward Bernays was born in 1891 to a family bound by blood and psychology to one of the great probing minds of the age. His mother was Sigmund Freud's sister, and young Edward grew up in the long shadow of Uncle Siggy, absorbing the radical notion that beneath the facade of civilized humans churn primitive drives, fears, and desires. In 1892, his family emigrated from Vienna to New York, where Bernays later studied at Cornell, earning a degree in agriculture, of all things, but gravitated toward the power of words over soil. By World War I, this sharp-minded nephew of Freud found his calling as a propagandist, a term he would famously rebrand as public relations, working on President Wilson's Committee on Public Information to stoke support for the war. He called this work psychological warfare, yet the most chilling revelation was how easily the same techniques could be turned on a peacetime populace. As Bernays later put it, "There was one basic lesson I learned in the CPI, that efforts comparable to those applied by the CPI to affect the attitudes of the enemy could be applied with equal facility to peacetime pursuits. In other words, what could be done for a nation at war could be done for organizations and people in a nation at peace." Armed with Freud's insight that human behavior is largely irrational and unconscious, Bernays became convinced that the masses desperately needed guiding by a smart and morally superior elite. If people's deep-seated wants and fears could be understood, they could be manipulated without their knowing. In 1928, at just 36 years old, he boldly wrote, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind." These words, published in his seminal book, Propaganda, were not a lament, but a playbook. Bernays saw no shame in this orchestration of opinion. To him, it was a necessary bulwark against chaos. Behind Bernays' confidence lay a fusion of new ideas: Freud's psychoanalysis, which revealed the wild impulses under the human psyche's surface; Gustave Le Bon's crowd psychology, which showed that individuals submerge their intellect in a herd; and Wilfred Trotter's herd instinct theories. Bernays distilled these into a simple article of faith: people are emotionally suggestible and malleable, especially in groups. The bigger the crowd, the more negligible the individual, as Carl Jung observed, and Bernays set out to play crowds like a master pianist. In the early 1920s, he opened a PR firm in New York and styled himself a public relations counsel, shunning the cruder label of advertiser. He was not merely selling products, he was selling ideas, weaving desires and reshaping norms. A wiry, fanatical propaganda minister named Joseph Goebbels surveys his library of strategy, a trove of books on mass persuasion. Among them is a volume by an American, Edward Bernays, Crystallizing Public Opinion. Goebbels grins, perhaps, as he tells a visiting journalist that this book will be a basis for his campaign against the Jews of Germany. The man who helped sell bacon and cigarettes in the US had, inadvertently, armed one of history's darkest regimes with psychological weapons. Bernays later learned of this moment with horror. Goebbels was using my book as a basis for his destructive campaign. This shocked me. Obviously, the attack on the Jews of Germany was not an emotional outburst of the Nazis, but a deliberate, planned campaign. It was propaganda taken to its most evil extreme. To be clear, Bernays was Jewish, and he claims to have flatly turned down an offer to consult for Hitler's government. But his writings became the Reich's playbook. In his propaganda, he had laid out core principles for shaping public opinion, and Nazi propagandists devoured it. Adolf Hitler himself wrote in Mein Kampf of the power of propaganda, noting that, by sagacious and persistent use of propaganda, heaven itself may be presented to a people as hell, and, inversely, the most wretched existence as paradise. Nazi Germany's leaders understood, as Bernays did, that the truth mattered less than the perception. They orchestrated spectacles of grandeur and fear, tapping into the German public's unconscious anxieties and hopes. Think of the press as a great keyboard on which the government can play, Goebbels said, bragging at how easily media could be used to manipulate minds. He also purportedly advised, "Make the lie big, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it." In Nazi rallies, endless repetition and grand theater whipped individual Germans into a single organism, irrational, obedient, intoxicated by belonging. Nietzsche's grim aphorism had come true. Madness is something rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. Mass insanity was not an aberration, but a tool, harnessed by those who knew how to push the right buttons. Bernays watched all this from afar, with a mix of vindication and revulsion. He had long argued that propaganda itself is morally neutral, the voice of the people in the democracy of today, as he defended it, but seeing his own methods carried into perfection in fascist Germany, alongside Goebbels' name, gave him pause. Critics in the 1930s openly compared Bernays to Goebbels, noting that each in his sphere had become a lord of propaganda. Hitler even credited Allied and American propaganda for Germany's defeat in World War I, inspiring the Nazis to outdo those techniques in World War II. Bernays' response was characteristically unapologetic. Rather than disavow propaganda, he suggested democracy simply needed better propaganda to fight the totalitarian kind. In his view, strong leaders and symbolic heroes could steer the masses to socially constructive ends, lest the bad guys monopolize the public mind. It's a disturbing moral gray zone. The same toolbox can sell soap or genocide. And Bernays, the self-proclaimed father of public relations, bequeathed that toolbox to the modern world, for good and for ill. And what about the American empire of influence? After witnessing how propaganda could topple nations, Bernays turned his focus back to the land of his adoption, the United States, with a fervent belief that consumer capitalism and democracy itself would thrive only if the public's desires were properly shaped. He set out to transform Americans from savvy citizens into willing consumers, their very identities entwined with the products they bought, and his corporate clients paid handsomely for his wizardry. Business realized that truth doesn't win unless it's promoted, Bernays quipped, so he became their promoter-in-chief. One of his earliest triumphs was the Bacon and Eggs campaign, a masterclass in stealthy influence. In the 1920s, the Beechnut Packing Company, a pork producer, wanted to boost sluggish bacon sales. Rather than launch a crude ad blitz, Bernays crafted a scientific fait accompli. He surveyed the eating habits of Americans and found, unsurprisingly, that most ate light breakfasts. So he went to a trusted physician, his own doctor, and asked a leading question. Would a hearty breakfast be better for health than a light one? The doctor agreed, and Bernays then had him write to 5,000 fellow doctors. Some 4,500 doctors replied confirming that a heavy, protein-rich breakfast was indeed advisable. Bernays packaged this expert consensus into press releases for newspapers nationwide. The headlines blared, "4,500 physicians urge bigger breakfast," and in the fine print, the good doctors recommended bacon and eggs as the optimal morning meal. The result? Americans' morning routines changed virtually overnight. Bacon went from a minor meat to a patriotic staple. The campaign was so effective that bacon and eggs became enshrined as the true all-American breakfast, and beech-nut sales of bacon sizzled upward. Bernays exulted in how effortlessly the public could be switched, as if actuated by the pressure of a button. Instead of the company begging people to buy, the people themselves began ardently working for the company. It was mind control at the breakfast table, served sunny side up. Not long after, Bernays turned his talents to a far more delicate taboo. In the Roaring '20s, American women faced a social stigma against smoking. It was considered unladylike, a vice for prostitutes or loose women. The tobacco companies smelled a huge untapped market if only the taboo could be lifted. George Washington Hill, president of the American Tobacco Company, practically begged Bernays for a solution. "If we can get women to smoke on the street, we'll damn near double our market. Do something." Bernays, ever the strategist, consulted A. Brill, a Freudian psychoanalyst, asking what cigarettes meant to women on a subconscious level. Brill's answer was gold. Cigarettes, which are equated with men, become torches of freedom for women. In other words, lighting a cigarette could be sold as an act of rebellion and liberation, a way for women to stake a claim to equality. With this concept in hand, Bernays devised one of the most iconic PR stunts of the century. On Easter Sunday, 1929, as New York City's Fifth Avenue filled with festive crowds, Bernays planted a group of young debutantes amid the spectators of the annual parade. At a prearranged moment, these women produced packets of Lucky Strike cigarettes and dramatically lit up their torches of freedom in unison. Photographers and reporters, also primed by Bernays through a cryptic press release about a women's rights protest, swarmed the scene. The next day, newspapers from coast to coast carried the story. Group of girls puff at cigarettes as a gesture of freedom. The symbolism was powerful. Moreover, he specially selected beautiful women with large busts and cleavage. After all, 50 years before the invention of Instagram, he knew that it was such covers that gained the most reach and likes. Men have an animal desire for such women, and women automatically conduct social validation and also want to become like them. Their bust will not grow, but with the help of cigarettes, you can become more like a strong and independent, free feminist. Smoking was now linked to women's emancipation, a blow against the patriarchy. The fact that the whole affair was stage-managed by a tobacco company's publicist remained hidden. Bernays made sure neither he nor his client was named. Many papers presented it as a spontaneous feminist action. The campaign had its critics, and its true impact on smoking rates has been debated, but the taboo was undeniably cracked. Through the early 1930s, women smoking in public became more accepted, and the percentage of cigarettes consumed by women nearly doubled, from roughly 5% in 1923 to 12% by 1929. Lucky Strike, the brand Bernays promoted, reaped a windfall. Revenue surged, and it led the tobacco market in growth. Bernays didn't stop there. When fashionistas complained that Lucky Strike's green packaging clashed with women's wardrobes, he orchestrated a society-wide trend to make green the hot new color, throwing gala green balls and enlisting designers to extol the hue. He was, quite literally, redesigning culture to sell cigarettes. As the decades rolled on, Bernays became the indispensable architect of influence for countless corporations, and even the US government. He publicized the 1939 New York World's Fair, promoted disposable Dixie cups by equating reuse with deadly disease, and helped Procter & Gamble sell Ivory soap by holding playful soap sculpture contests for children. His showmanship knew no bounds, but perhaps the most consequential and covert operation of his career came after World War II, in service not just of a company, but of American geopolitical power. In the early 1950s, Bernays was on the payroll of United Fruit Company, the banana empire, whose vast plantations in Central America were being threatened by a new democratic government in Guatemala. When Guatemala's president, Jacobo Arbenz, began reforms that aimed to curb United Fruit's stranglehold and redistribute unused plantation land to poor farmers, the company labeled him a communist menace, and Bernays was the man they tasked with making that label stick. What followed was a textbook case of modern disinformation. Bernays set up a fake Middle America Information Bureau to feed alarming news about Guatemala to journalists and opinion shapers. He drummed up incessant press coverage, warning that a Soviet beachhead was forming in the Western Hemisphere. Influential magazines like Time and Newsweek dutifully ran articles about the Red Threat in Guatemala. United Fruit's lobbyists handed U.S. congressmen anonymous reports authored by Bernays' team, painting Arbenz as a danger to continental security. The American public, bombarded with these stories, grew fearful that a communist dagger was pointed at Texas. In June 1954, the fear climaxed in action. The CIA, with the blessings of the Eisenhower administration, covertly backed a military coup, Operation PB Success, that overthrew Arbenz. During the coup, guess who served as the primary source of information for the international newswires? Edward Bernays, conveniently supplying the narrative of liberation from communism as Guatemala's elected government, was toppled. He even helped stage manage the image of the new US-backed dictator, Castillo Armas, presenting him as the savior of democracy. The episode was a triumph for United Fruit and Washington, but a tragedy for Guatemala, which entered decades of repression. It also coined a term that endures today: the Banana Republic, originally a reference to United Fruit's domination of Central American governments. Bernays had proven beyond doubt that a savvy PR campaign could facilitate the overthrow of a sovereign nation, all under the righteous banner of freedom. The American empire of influence was in full swing, blending corporate avarice and Cold War geopolitics with Bernays' finely tuned psychological manipulations. By the mid-20th century, Bernays was known as the father of public relations, a title he wore proudly. He lived to be 103, witnessing the world he'd helped create, a world where marketing and propaganda permeated every corner of daily life. As one retrospective noted, it is impossible to fundamentally grasp the social, political, economic, and cultural developments of the past 100 years without some understanding of Bernays and his professional heirs in the public relations industry. Modern advertising, political campaigning, and even entertainment owed a debt to his innovations. He had taught a generation how to sell anything, not by touting facts, but by tapping emotions and subconscious urges. "We're still singing off the hymn book that Bernays gave us," said a leading PR executive in the 1990s, acknowledging that the strategies in play throughout Madison Avenue and Pennsylvania Avenue alike trace back to this one man's playbook. Edward Bernays' legacy is a Janus-faced creature, at once mesmerizing and terrifying. On one face, we see the consummate salesman, the genius who linked bacon with patriotism, cigarettes with freedom, bananas with anti-communism, and endless other ingenious pairings. He distilled Freud's complex theories into practical weapons of persuasion. He believed people could be guided for their own good, that the minority which uses this power works more and more on behalf of ideas that are socially constructive, as he optimistically wrote. On the other face of Bernays' legacy is a darker truth. Those same techniques can just as easily herd us to our doom. He showed how easy it is to turn rational individuals into an unthinking crowd, how to weaponize our hidden fears and yearnings to serve an agenda. Every time you see an advertisement that makes you feel insecure unless you buy, every time a politician manufactures a crisis to rally support, every trending hashtag or viral meme that seems to spread like wildfire, you are witnessing Bernays' principles in action, refined to a high art. Modern marketing is a refined weapon of mind control, wielded not only by governments and big tobacco CEOs, but by big tech algorithms, data brokers, and social media influencers. Bernays taught that credibility is key. Find third parties to carry your message so the target doesn't see the strings. Today, that third party might be a paid Instagram celebrity, subtly endorsing a lifestyle, or a grassroots Facebook group, quietly steered by corporate interests. He taught the value of creating news. Stage an event so dramatic the media can't help but cover it. In our era, that might be a flashy product launch, a controversial tweet, or a polarizing stunt that generates millions in free publicity. He taught the power of emotion over reason. As he said, the average person has a mind like a rubber stamp, primed with ready-made slogans and images, innocent of original thought, waiting for the right trigger. Modern propagandists have taken this to heart. Political consultants frame elections not on policy details, but on feelings, fear, pride, resentment, aiming for the gut, not the brain. Advertisers don't sell products. They sell aspiration, anxiety, belonging. A car commercial isn't about the engine. It's about the freedom you supposedly gain by driving it. A cosmetics ad sells confidence and allure, tapping into our deepest social insecurities. These are Bernays' children, even if they don't know his name. As one scholar noted, Bernays, widely eulogized as the father of public relations, played a major role in defining the industry's philosophy and methods, and those methods now saturate our digital age. Think about your daily life, the curated feeds of content you scroll through, the personalized ads that seem to read your mind, the political echo chambers online. We live in a world of ubiquitous propaganda, though we call it by other names: public relations, marketing, entertainment, news. Bernays would likely grin to see how effective and seamless it has become, but he might also caution us. In his later years, perhaps sensing the dangers, he argued that propaganda in a democracy at least allows multiple competing voices, whereas in a dictatorship, only one voice is allowed. Yet today, even in democracies, we face the specter of mass manipulation on a scale he never dreamed of. AI algorithms fine-tuning messages to each personality, misinformation spreading at light speed, entire populations narcotized by an endless stream of tailored distractions. The wires that control the public mind have multiplied into a web that's hard to see and even harder to escape. So, what do we do with this knowledge? Bernays' story is a warning as much as it is a lesson. It urges awareness. The first defense against being manipulated is to recognize that you are being manipulated. Recall the insight of psychologist Carl Jung. No one can flatter himself that he is immune to the spirit of his own epoch. Each one of us is somewhere attached to, colored by, the spirit which goes through the mass. Freedom stretches only as far as the limits of our consciousness. In other words, to be free, we must first wake up. We must discern which of our opinions are truly our own and which have been implanted by a skillful PR campaign or viral marketing ploy. We must ask, who benefits from the way I'm being guided to think or feel? Bernays insisted that manipulation is inevitable. If so, then we must become our own propagandists, consciously choosing the ideas and values that we allow to shape us. In the end, Sigmund Freud's nephew leaves us with a stark choice. Freud once remarked that most people do not really want freedom because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility. Bernays banked on this very fear, the ease with which people surrender their autonomy to those who promise to do their thinking for them. Now, ask yourself as the credits of this cautionary tale roll, will you be one of the few who shoulders the responsibility of freedom? The tools of manipulation are only as powerful as our willingness to be led by them. It's time to decide. In the battle for your mind and soul, you're either in control or you're being controlled.